The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before. As we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how the design industry can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for your businesses and consumers. I'm your host, Peter Marion, and you're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. Well, the events of the past 6 months have created a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear as our lives have been disrupted across so many fronts. What we're seeing is an opportunity to refocus on the positive experiences that people have had through lockdown and could continue to do so as we come out of this crisis. Well, obviously, this is not to make light of the devastating and tragic losses that many of us are experiencing at the moment. But this break from life as normal is providing an opportunity for us to create a better, more optimistic future for our businesses and consumers. There has been this fantastic Arundhati Roy quote that has gone viral in recent months. She wrote, "Pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So today, we're asking what's on the other side of the gateway and how can we make sure it's something that we can be optimistic about?" Now, before we begin, I want to caveat this episode by saying that we recorded this episode a few weeks ago before the global protest against racial injustice began and the Black Lives Matter movement gathered such momentum. We felt that it was still important to share with you our predictions around positivity, as from these horrors, there is hope that we as societies are now starting to unpack these systemic issues and build towards a future that is better for everybody. But we'll be talking more about this in coming episodes. I'll be joined in this by Francesca Muston, VP of Fashion Content. Hi, Francesca.
Hey, Peter.
What are you feeling optimistic about right now?
I'm feeling actually quite optimistic about all sorts of things right now. I suppose I'm feeling optimistic mostly about the catalyst for change and about all the positivity that I think that can bring.
That's fantastic. And the other person that I'm joined by today is Andrea Bell, head of WGSN Insight.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good.
Fantastic. And what are you feeling optimistic about?
I would kind of echo Cheska's sentiment, not to piggyback. Just really interested in what's happening and how all of this has really just kind of really shined a light on things that we can change and we can explore and kind of new ways of working.
I think it can feel quite empowering in a way, right?
Exactly. And we're all kind of beta testing these large themes that we once thought were impossible or just not even achievable. Now here we are.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic thing, because one of the things that I've been looking at in some of the work that I've been doing at the moment is really around how optimism changes your efficacy. So basically, if you feel optimistic, you actually are driving change and are willing to sort of focus on long-term goals and short-term goals, and your success in those sorts of things tends to be better. But Andrea, in your Future Consumer 2022 report, which everyone loves and is one of the sort of flagship reports we put out each year, one of your consumer cohorts were called the New Optimists, where you described them as having a vivacious appetite to embrace joy, a brave choice in the face of uncertainty. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, I mean, the New Optimists, they're really fascinating. So they're demographic agnostic. They range from Gen Z through to boomers. But the real unifier is this kind of radical optimism, as I think we're all kind of touching on and explaining. But so whether it was Gen Z who are facing a critical amount of eco-anxiety or millennials just kind of struggling with the cult of productivity, this cohort has really said, we're going to embrace joy as a backlash to consistent negativity. And as we've said, and you may have heard on some other reports across WGSN, being optimistic is a brave choice in times of uncertainty. And it's not always the easiest choice. And clearly right now, we can see that in everything from, again, how we're designing fashion, how we're engaging with our consumers, and even amongst our friends and colleagues. It takes a lot to be positive when sometimes it feels incredibly overwhelming.
That's fantastic. And how do you see that kind of evolving out of our present situation now and into the future?
What's fascinating is the New Optimist, when we started tracking this as a team in November of 2019, we started to see a rise in celebrationism. And that's actually a system that exalts and kind of extols celebration, right? It's a core focus of society. And what's fascinating is we started tracking it in November, and it was small moments of joy. And we didn't want to dub it the celebration economy, but we could see it was an evolution of the experience economy. And the real shift was the experience economy, was definitely rooted in doing things for the gram and going to concerts and making sure if it wasn't on your Instagram, it didn't happen. This was kind of the opposite. This was the experience economy rooted in gratitude. Really having those moments of celebration with friends and family. And what's fascinating, and I'm sure, Chess feels it as well, is we're seeing this so much more, currently during the coronavirus around just celebrating everyday moments. So think about promotions. We're having to do things differently online. So, excuse me, my dog's barking. Apologies. Speaking of working from home and celebration, she got excited. So whether we're selling birthdays or weddings or engagements, we're all in a moment right now where we just want to have joy and bring something. So I think we definitely can see the celebration shifts happening, and that sounds somewhat strange in today's current mindset, but through 2022 and 2023, I think there'll be a new appetite for those small moments of joy.
I actually completely agree with you, Andrea. What we're seeing right now is a very different approach to celebration. And actually, I was just on the phone earlier with Laura Yanaku, our senior editor of Women's Wear, and she's working on an intelligence piece at the moment about occasion wear. And obviously, occasion wear is really tied into celebration. But the way that the fashion industry works at the moment is that those celebrations are really very calendarized. And so you've got Christmas party, you've got prom, you've got weddings, and we're expecting to see a lot of shifts around that. But I think the important thing for us is to look at how the behaviours are changing around celebration and accept that celebration is just not going to look exactly the same. But absolutely, there still will be that desire to celebrate, and this idea that optimism kind of can't be held back, that you kind of almost get this cooker pressure of optimism, and it's got to have its outlet somewhere, and there still will be those moments of celebration.
Chess, I was speaking of Laura Yanaku, an occasion where I attended a friend's virtual wedding last week, and it was still black tie. So it was really interesting to see kind of everyone coming on Zoom to get dressed up and having those moments, throwing, digital rice, so to speak, but definitely agree.
What we're seeing at the moment, I guess, as we move on from this, is this opportunity for people to create a better society. In a YouGov survey, only 9% of people want life to return to the way that it was before the pandemic. So my next question is, how do each of you see this evolving in terms of consumption and how people want to spend their money?
I think there's a definite reprioritization of values and what you need. I think, in terms of, I don't want to use the Marie Kondo effect. I think the people that were starting to do it in 2018 really saying, what do I want? What do I need? Does it spark joy? Do I essentially need this in my day-to-day? That was already starting to happen globally. And I think particularly around COVID and the pandemic, people are really looking at what values they want in life and how they want to spend with their dollars and where do they want that money to go.
Yeah, totally agree. It's fundamentally shifted our relationship with consumption there. And, I often actually cite Marie Kondo as the biggest influencer in fashion in recent years because, she forces us to really think about how we're interacting and the emotional relationship we have with our possessions and with our clothes. So, yeah, completely agree. And I'd also say, Peter, that this has a lot to do with for the fashion industry in particular, but also for other industries as well. There were so many things that were wrong with it. There were so many things that were broken and that we, as a global industry, were openly acknowledging were broken around seasonality and discounting and all these other things. But it can feel so terrifying when that's the way things have always been done, to genuinely shake things up and change things. And I think people as individuals or as individual businesses or even individual organisations felt quite powerless to affect change. Whereas when you're in a situation where the entire damn thing is broken, and you've got an opportunity there to put it back together, not in the way that it was, but in the way that we can all now come together and put it back in a way which makes much more sense.
And what would an industry that makes sense look like coming out of this?
There's a lot of inefficiencies in fashion. It's almost like the speed of fashion has sort of run away from us in many ways. And of course, the speed has been very tightly tied up to the idea of, generating newness and profit and keeping people excited and all of those things. But actually, we know from the amount of overstock, not just this season, but in other seasons as well, and all of the discounting that goes on, that actually there's a lot of fashion product that doesn't really hit the mark. And even if it does hit the mark, and even if the consumer buys it and takes it home with them, we also know that a lot of consumers have in their wardrobes a lot of clothes that they really felt were going to work for them, but they got them home and got them into their real lives. And in the kind of cold light of day, actually, they found no occasion at all to wear them. And I think this is where we have to be very clear around what good value looks like to the consumer. So, yeah, I think putting it back together again with real efficiencies sort of baked into the system. So whether that's all the insane amount of travelling that we've been doing as an industry, just, it's almost in our busyness, we've kind of lost a grip on where we're truly able to make a difference. And then, creating those products that the consumer doesn't get home and think, actually, why on earth did I buy this? But that there's more consideration put into the fashion industry. And that's consideration at the design, at the sourcing stage, for the retailer, for the buyer, for the designer, but also for the consumer.
And I think it's fascinating when Chess was talking about inefficiencies just in terms of design as well. And we can see that across multiple industries. And the big one, I think, is supply chain sourcing. Even whether that's fashion or lifestyle and interiors or beauty products, for years we've relied on these kind of big machines. And to Chess's point, when you're trying to turn that machine, it can seem mammoth. And the pandemic has definitely come in and said, these things are possible. And for a lot of companies, they're reallocating and going, where are we reprioritizing our own funds? So many of those luxury brands that were adamant they weren't going to sell online or they would never do e-commerce. And it wasn't, while it was the sustainable option, they never wanted to touch that space because it was considered taboo. And of course, since March, you can see this massive pivot towards digital. But while we're pivoting towards digital retail, Peta, and you've been tracking this in your own reports, there's also this need is, what does the in-store store look like for the future? What does that mean? What is that connection? And how is that human connection really changing the way we prioritize and shop, and what things we want from a shopping experience? So that whole inefficiency cycle is touching every single part of the ecosystem for retail.
And it's also accelerating a lot of the trends that we've talked about already, and both you and I have been forecasting for quite some time around localism and all that sort of stuff, which is really, that human experience will come from elsewhere. But to go back to something, Francesca, something that you said, and it's made me think a lot about what this opportunity could look like for designers in a really positive sense, because, you start to think about why people go into design, and it's because they want to craft things that are useful or that people love. And this is almost like you're resetting the calendar and you're resetting the system in a way that really drives us back to that situation where designers are designing for those purposes. Is that fair? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of the people who will be listening to this podcast will be able to identify with that, the treadmill and the amount of designs that as an industry we're having to turn out now doesn't allow for real consideration in the design process. And whether you're working for a big box retailer or a supplier, or if, even if you're, Alessandro Michele, he's basically coming out and saying the same thing, right? It's like, I've got too many collections that I've got to deliver in a year. And really, in order to be able to design thoughtfully and to explore the creativity around it, giving yourself a bit of space to do that can only be a positive thing, and that's a positive thing for everybody, whether you're a retailer or a manufacturer or a designer or a consumer.
I think Lisa White, who's our creative director and director of lifestyle and interiors, she has a great quote about changing systems, not just stuff. And I think it's fascinating to what Chess is saying about just the shift from when you even think about design, it's not just the actual products. We think about packaging and sustainability. How are we redesigning hang tags? What are the small things from design, again, that we just keep pushing out because it's always part of the process. So whether it's fashion product or, sustainable materials or how we're actually messaging and talking, these are all moments that we're fundamentally have the ability right now to take that pause and say, how do we redesign it? What is the new system? Let's quit focusing on stuff and really put our energy into these new ways of working and living.
And this makes me so excited about what we do every day. But if we were to think sort of more extensively about this and really focus this around sustainability, I guess, because I think that is one of the things that we kind of start dropping back. This conversation always ends up falling back towards something that is more sustainable. What should our fashion industries be doing in this sort of pause period to build towards a more sustainable future?
A lot of our fashion clients are already well on their way and have set themselves some very clear goals and are already, the wheels are very much in motion there. And, I do get asked this question quite a lot, how important is sustainability in this new sort of future that we're looking at? And of course, it's as important. In many ways, it's more important because you don't want to solve for one crisis and then just find yourself in the midst of another. And I think for us as forecasters, we spend a lot of our time thinking about the implications of people, of all of the different impacts that we're going to have as societies and as individuals. And so we see very clearly the impact of the environmental crisis, and we can see with real clarity because of the amount of forecasting research that we do, quite how critical that is. And the imperative really is to rebuild the system so that it addresses both the post-coronavirus consumer attitude and the fundamental changes in the way that we live our lives, as well as making it more sustainable. It would be sort of ridiculous in many ways to not address both of those things in tandem.
So if we were to jump forward a year, maybe 2 years from now, we've moved through the crisis of the pandemic, we've moved through the next normal and maybe the normal after, and life is looking some version of normal again. And we were looking back towards now and the things that businesses could have done to create a positive future. What would the future look like 2 years from now if we've done the right things, and what things should we have done now to get there?
Fundamentally, if we're looking 2 years ahead and saying, how are we rebuilding these systems? It's looking at our employees, our own staff. And I know that's become quite apparent for a lot of people across the globe. We're looking at what is of value to people that work, how are we compensating fairly, and what are those essential workers. So I think from a very fundamental human point, an empathetic point, I hope in 2 years from now we realize, and celebrate and also reward hard work for everyone across, whether it's the cashier at the local retail location to the person delivering, your safety materials, your new sustainable hangers, these kinds of fundamental employees that's due to the pandemic have really been brought to light. It's we've all seen the memes, but the people that are really having a lifeline for us are, everyone from delivery to janitors to, it's shifted. So I think 2 years from now, I hope fundamentally that's where we're at. And I think the second one is really taking a look at rebuilding community and what that means. I'm sure everyone listening has started to know their neighbors more, have engaged more with people in their building or their neighborhood more than pre-pandemic. And I hope that continues and that we continue to, in a very utopian, I'm from Southern California, so a very utopian hippie vibe. I hope we can continue to focus on our local communities, and that will have a wider impact.
Yeah, well, Andrea, you're right. And as somebody who's from London, where we don't talk to people on the public transport, I think that it has totally shifted our relationship with one another. And one of the most important things for us to consider out of the back of that is how do we transfer that positive feedback loop that we're getting from the improved connections with our family, with our friends, and with our local community. How do we translate that over to product? Because product has been very much driven by the sort of short-term emotional hit that you get from product, that kind of I want it now, buy it now, regret it later, and all of that kind of language, which we know doesn't bring us lasting happiness. But there is still hope for products that do bring us lasting happiness, right? And we've talked a lot, and I know that the two of you have certainly written quite a lot in the recent past about products with purpose, and the idea that when you're buying something, you're also contributing, because it's so powerful. The emotional connection that you get from being able to help other people and being able to contribute to something, being able to contribute to a higher purpose, like these are all really strong emotional drivers. And so buying products which have this aspect of altruism in them, I think is going to be so critical. And then I guess for me, at its most simple, what I hope that we land on is a deeper and better connection between us as people and the products that we buy and the products that we own. And as Andrea says, that we have more awareness of all of the people who have contributed to that, all of the people who made that product come about, and that we don't kind of sort of cover them up in this kind of the opacity of the supply chain. But once we get true transparency, that we understand the human aspect of that, and that enriches the products, and it enriches the relationship that we have with them.
One of the things that I think is fascinating in the U.S., Jess, is with when you just said, we have this awareness now, we can see it. And if you look at all the news stories and, whether it's Seattle or Paris or London, all of the local shops and retail locations having boards on them and being boarded up, and people every day saying, I walk by that now and I realize that it's not just a store, it's a neighbor, that's their job, that's their lifeline, that's their retirement. So in a strange way, not being able to go in and have those daily interactions have made us so much aware of how critical those stores are and those restaurants and pubs are to our community. And so I think even more so in 2022, we're going to be really excited to see when those open.
Oh my God, we're going to be so grateful for the first time that we get to go into a pub and sit at the bar. My relationship with that first drink is going to be deep.
I can't wait to go into a restaurant and eat a meal. But what one thing should businesses be doing from both a short-term and long-term perspective to create a more optimistic future for their consumers and for their business as well?
I'd say using the time that has been sort of forced upon us. And completely appreciate that not everybody in businesses, there are a lot of people in businesses who are still absolutely up against it, trying to rephase products and all of those challenges, but really using this moment to stop, think, reset. And a lot of businesses are reducing the amount of SKUs that they have. I think to look at that, whatever SKUs you have left in your kind of reduced offering, to really make sure that those are working hard, to really think about the consumer and how they're going to interact with your product, what it is in terms of their lifestyle and how they're going to use that product, but also think about what value looks like to the consumer as well. So value has really kind of become shorthand for low price, and we need to think about what good value really looks like to the consumer. Is it something that they're going to be able to get a lot of joy from in a kind of Marie Kondo style? Is it something they're going to be able to get a lot of wear out of? The idea of cost per wear as a new metric going forward, I think, is a really compelling one. So I would really encourage businesses at this time to really reassess what the value looks like, and where you feel like you're streamlining and sort of trimming things down in order to keep costs low. Does your consumer really want low costs, or do they really want a very well considered product that's going to fit with their lifestyle and that they're going to be able to get a lot of wear out of? These are quite fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. And the other thing I think that they need to do is just stop and check in with your consumer. Don't assume that you know who they are because they've just been through a massive life-changing event, right? And, don't assume that their online shopping habits are the same. Don't assume that their priorities are the same. Don't assume, actually, we're going into a big recession. And I know this is a podcast about optimism, so I'll try not to dwell on this too much. But don't assume that their spending power is going to be the same either. You do need to go back and sort of check in on that consumer. I can thoroughly recommend the Future Consumer 2022 by Andrea Bell, actually, if you want a little more reading on that.
Well, I think Chessa's point about values is critical too, because it's not just the value of the product and the cost per wear. It's also time for companies to really sit down and go, okay, where are we putting our money? Where are we prioritizing? And while we can sit here and go, okay, great, how do we do this? And to Chessa's point, let's address the elephant in the room. There is a recession coming for. We know that a lot of companies globally are taking cost-cutting measures. But while we're cutting these costs, what are we investing in for the next 2-3 years? What is that sustainable materials and fabrics? Is that how we're speaking? Again, that client feedback loop and that consumer feedback loop that Chess mentioned. This is the time. We're all sitting here wanting to speak, wanting to engage, wanting to reset, renew things. So taking the opportunity right now to say, how are our customers shopping now? What do they want in 2 to 5 years? It's going to continuously shift. So I think just having the mindset of BAU and we'll just be cash conservative isn't going to help you in 3 to 5 years. But saying, as a team, as a design team, as a marketing team, as an in-house strategic team, saying how all three of us can align to reprioritize what we want to do as a brand, and how does that flood to design, communications, and at the end of the day, creating those products with purpose for consumers.
I'm so grateful that you've made the time to talk about this really important topic. So thank you so much, Andrea and Cheska. I'm feeling really optimistic now too. And thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to us. You can find us on all major podcast platforms. And if you really like what you heard, then please leave us a rating and review. It really does help us get the word out there. If you're interested in what we've been talking about today, then please head over to wgsn.com to find out how you can get access to much more insight and analysis. If you're already a WGSN subscriber, head over to the site where we've pulled together all of our research on how we design a better future in the current and post-COVID-19 world, with key points from this podcast in one handy report. Thanks again to our guests. And I'd also like to thank our show producer, Roland Boddenham. And again, thank you for being here. Please stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time. Bye.